And now I'm honored to introduce United States Senator Tom Coburn. Dr. Tom Coburn was elected to the U.S. Senate on November 2nd, 2004, and was re-elected to a second and final term in 2010. He currently serves on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and the Committee on Finance. Dr. Coburn earned an accounting degree from Oklahoma State University in 1970 and graduated from the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine in 1983. Please join me in welcoming United States Senator Tom Coburn.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Thank you. Morning, please have a seat. It's great to be with you. Thinking this morning early, most of the talks when I go over, can you all hear? All right. No? Let me get this a little closer, and if it doesn't work, how about now? Better? Try this one. How's that? Normally, I have to leave pharmaceuticals at the exit door in terms of antidepressants after I give a speech. And so what I wanted to do was to just tell you about what I see as the possibilities of our future if things would change with leadership in Washington. And I'm reminded of the story of the grade school teacher who took her third grade students to the post office to see the post office and to see how it operated. And there on the wall was the FBI's 10 most wanted. And there actually was an FBI agent that had officed in the same federal building as the post office. And she talked him into coming out and answering the kids' questions. And so after calming them down about not being fearful of who these were, this young little girl asked the FBI agent, she said, "I don't understand. Why didn't you keep them when you took their picture?" And we're kind of at that point in our country. We need to take a new picture. But I want to talk to you about what the potential is. It's easy to give a down speech because of everything that we face and we see. As I travel across the country, and I've been all across it this last year and a half, America's anxious. In our gut, we know things aren't right. But it's important to keep in perspective that this country has a history of doing very hard things. And that there isn't one problem in front of us that we, in fact, can't solve if we have great leadership. And so our real problem is leadership. At a lot of different levels, but that's our real problem. So let me just describe for you a moment what it would look like if we had great leadership. The first thing would happen is we would not send $320 billion a year out of this country to purchase somebody else's oil and natural gas. That'd be the first thing. What would that look like? You talk about 1.7 million additional jobs in the energy industry. You talk about another $100 billion in terms of the economic multiplier for that would go to the federal treasury. And what else would that look like? What that would look like is a total revolution in manufacturing in our country. Because the raw feedstock, the basic carbon atoms, through the technology mainly of Oklahomans, not the federal government, we have enabled ourselves to have available to us a source of energy at half the rest of the world's cost. So what does that mean when you have a $5 billion ethylene plant being completed in Texas and two more on the drawing board? And in terms of raw materials, the job creation, the potential cost in terms of energy for us in terms of manufacturing. You're talking millions of jobs. You're talking wealth creation. You're talking opportunity for our graduates where 1 out of 2 right now can't get a job, whose parents or themselves have invested in an education and then can't reap the benefits of that education. So what I'm describing and what is possible is a dynamism that we haven't seen for a long time, since the 80s in this country. The other thing that would look like would be a total reform of the tax code. That's my beeper going off, pardon me. A total reform of the tax code where we eliminate, and at a chamber benefit, let me make sure I understand, you understand, that I mean what I'm getting ready to say. We eliminate crony capitalism. That means the well-heeled, the well-connected do not benefit at the expense of the rest of the country. And if you did that, you could very easily have a corporate tax rate of under 20%. You could have a dynamic effect of lowering and broadening the tax code that would bring an extra $1 trillion of revenue to the federal government per year. That's what the potential is. The other area is where we see and we seem to have a hangover or an anxiety is healthcare. It's the one thing where we've made promises that there's no way we can keep under the present scenario. So what would it look like if you changed that and you incentivized market forces to help allocate scarce resources? What we know about healthcare is 1 out of $3 that we spend on it doesn't help anybody in any way. That's $850 billion last year. 4 studies now, 4 economic studies confirm that. What we know as a nation is that if we really embrace market principles, we actually get better allocation of resources and we get wealth creation. Except we don't believe that in higher education or healthcare. And both have led us in terms of the cost, pardon me, increases, inflation-related increases in terms of our country. So what I'm really describing for you is it's not really hard to change these 3 parameters. What is hard is replacing who's in Washington. And the answer to our problems, the answer to my grandchildren, my 7 grandchildren problem, is to send to Washington people who embrace the very character traits that built this nation. And unfortunately, a lot who are there don't. And so I'm excited about November. I see it as a great opportunity to restore our country, to restore confidence, to take some of the $2.7 trillion that's sitting in business bank accounts today and put it to work with certainty and confidence about the future. I just remind you that after Reagan and the Congress totally renovated the tax code, I can remember as a doctor practicing in Muskogee, I was really mad at Reagan because my taxes went up. But guess what happened over the next 4 years in terms of GDP in our country? The size of our economy over the next 4 years increased by 29%. Just through a rework, a reform, and a redirection of our tax code that encouraged investment, that encouraged wealth creation, and encouraged transparency in terms of it. And then I'd make one final point that we ought to have with any tax reform. And that would be that we should quit spending $350 billion a year to pay our taxes because it creates no wealth. It causes us to employ 110,000 IRS agents, with 10,000 more to be added with the now Affordable Care Act, which I think is wasteful and not good stewards. So I don't see any problem in front of us that we, as Americans, can't solve. And then just to relate it back to what our founders thought. Our founders developed this wonderful system of government. They knew it was dangerous because it required true citizen responsibility to survive. And they divided a balance of power between the three branches of government. And that's what we study when we're in high school and junior high in civics and history. But the one thing that we forget to teach is the real balance of power that they talked about more than anything else. And that was us holding the government accountable. And the fact is the government has grown to where it's twice the size it was 11 years ago. Go look at Bill Clinton's last budget and look at the CR we're operating under today. It's more than twice the size it was. And the reason that's been allowed to happen is because we, the people, have not held our elected representatives, including me, accountable in a way that would drive us back to the limited government, the freedoms that can derive from that, that our founders intended. It's great to be an Oklahoman. I come back to the state every weekend. I see Congressman Langford on the plane almost every week. We can't wait to get out of Washington. You know, it's free. It's kind of freedom. As soon as the wheels are up, you know, it's all of a sudden we go from downcast corners of our mouth to upcast corners of our mouth because we know we're going to someplace really good, and that's Oklahoma. It is such a privilege and such an honor to be able to say, I'm from Oklahoma, because it's really different here, folks. Is we really get it. We understand the heritage and the culture that built this country, and it's inculcated both into our kids and also the work ethic that you see in Oklahoma. To see a state with a 4.7% unemployment rate, to see investment. My hometown of Muskogee is, I've never seen so much construction. You know, one of our tougher counties in the state in terms of economic development, booming. People get it. The responsibility that we have to represent the values of Oklahoma, we take very seriously. And so it's okay for us to be the target. It's okay for us to lose, but it's not okay for us not to try to represent those values. I would just say in closing, I get to brag about Oklahoma City all the time. And this is where vision really matters. You know, you think back 25 years in Oklahoma City, and you think about some of the visionary leadership that was here, and you see and you are able to reap the benefits, the fruits of that vision. As leadership solves division and brings people together, great things are accomplished. So it's really fun to see all the notoriety that Oklahoma City's getting. We're nurturing that in Tulsa. It's coming. We're going to be nipping at your heels real soon. But the point is you've already done it. You've already set an example for the rest of the state. What we need to do is set an example for the rest of the country. Thank you. Good morning.
We actually have a couple of 3 minutes for questions for Dr. Coburn, if you would like to ask one. Yes, sir.
Being conducted in Oklahoma. Would you mind sharing some of your findings with the audience on what can be done to address the duplication and waste in these types of government programs?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, we did. 2 years ago with the debt limit increase, I inserted in that a mandate that the Government Accountability Office tell me every program in the federal government. Because I've asked them and the Congressional Research Service to give them to me, and they can't. They say it's impossible. So we're in the third year of that. Well, this job training study came out because you as taxpayers right now are paying for 47 federal job training programs for non-disabled workers, 50 different job training programs for disabled, spending $23 billion a year. So what we decided to do is we looked through the field staff that my office has at your pleasure to look at job training in Oklahoma. And what we actually found is the people who are employed in federal job training programs actually care, but the system is so messed up that basically it's ineffective. And let me just give you some examples. Oklahoma's got $187 million this last year for federal job training programs. They operate under 40 separate ones. What works in Oklahoma are the state-funded, state-operated, and state-run job training programs. What does not work in Oklahoma are federally funded job training programs. Are there some exceptions? Sure. But if you look at it in total, what does work? We have one city in Oklahoma that has 16,000 people and has an unemployment rate under 5% and has 17 job training programs employing 96 people. Well, those are job training programs about employing people in job training, not about training people for jobs and life skills. So actually, some good work has been done in the House. A congresswoman from North Carolina, who is a sassy grandma, actually in her committee, 33 of these job training programs were under their authority, and she reduced them to one and cut them to $9 billion from $18 billion just for the federal job training program. But I want you to think about that for a minute. What really works in Oklahoma is career tech. You know, it's flexible, it's nimble, it works. But I want you to think about, here's just job training program, where we could easily save $9 billion a year. That's $90 billion over 10 years. Now multiply that by 150 other sets of programs that are just as bad, just as egregious, and just as ineffective. No wonder we're bankrupt. And nobody's minding the store. So I took it on my own to say, let's be critical about what we see in our state, so nobody can say, you're just pointing it out, you're not even looking at your own state. And remember, this isn't about the employees. The federal bureaucracy, when you have 47 different sets of rules and one doesn't communicate with the other, makes it impossible for somebody to effectively create a program that helps people.
Question?
Senator, first of all, thank you for being here. You recently introduced legislation that would delay the production of new weapons systems until the Department of Defense conducts an audit of its operations. Could you give us some of the reasons for and the details behind that bill? Thank you.
Yeah, since 1978, the Pentagon was required to be audited. Let's see, now what year is this? It's the only agency in the federal government that is unauditable. They do not know where they spend their money. They do not know where their money goes. They don't even know if they've paid their bills or not. The way we operate the Pentagon from a financial standpoint actually hurts our defense posture. And if you can't count and measure, you can't manage. And there isn't anybody that runs a business in here that knows that you can run your business on the seat of the pants and not be able to account for it. And one of the great things about being a physician and an accountant is you really can't BS me on those issues. And so what we have said, and Leon Panetta buys is you can do some research, but if you want to deploy a new weapon system, you got to have audited financial statements before you can do it. I'm one of the rare Republicans. I think it's easy to take $1 trillion over the next 10 years out of the Pentagon. I can actually show you where it is. You know, we just spend $44,000 a year per student to educate kids on base in America, on military bases. 4 times what we spend anywhere else in the country, with poorer outcomes. That's $9 billion over 10 years. If you just pay the local school district $14,000 a year. I'm sorry, God. So as I was saying before, so rudely being interrupted. We have the most effective military in the world. We have the least efficient. And there are lots of changes, both in culture and in numbers, not in terms of end strength, not in terms of fighters, not in terms of warfare capability. We can easily take $1 trillion and never affect our defense at all. And all you have to do, I mean, we have several companies from Oklahoma I get letters from. They supply a part for a significant component on one of our weapon systems. And in the aftermarket, they can sell it at 1/3 the price of what the Pentagon's buying it. And actually, when the Pentagon does buy it from a Boeing or somebody else, they're actually buying it from the same person. If you think about contracting in the military, there's about 8 layers. The actual guy that makes it, it's kind of like the Corps of Engineers paying for the blue covering for the roofs in Louisiana, or the pickup of the debris. We paid the Corps $58. They paid the guy that was doing it $6 a cubic yard. Everybody else made money in between. The taxpayer got hosed. Same thing's happening in terms of purchase of military equipment and development of systems. And there needs to be some grown-ups and some transparency. And what Dwight Eisenhower warned about is a real thing. The military-industrial complex breeds on itself, and it's okay to have it, but you got to have transparency, and we have none right now. And so there's going to be a challenge to it. I don't mind leading that challenge. I don't mind being criticized. I love our country. I want us to have the best defense. But I'd remind everybody in this room, the Pentagon never wanted the A-10. And if you ask today the warfighter what's the best plane they'd like to see coming around them, it was the A-10. And it was because they didn't make enough money off of it building the A-10. So, I mean, there's example after example after example, and we can clean it up. We can not have to lose capability in Navy, Air Force, Marines, Army. We don't have to lose any in-strength capability and still save $1 trillion over 10 years.
Any other questions? Oh, one more, I'm sorry. Oh.
Governor Romney's selection of him.
The question is, could I share my thoughts on the Romney selection? I don't think he could have made a better selection. I actually had that about 2.5 weeks before that selection was made. I had a fairly long conversation with Mitt Romney on him. Paul is exactly what you see is what you get. He is free to speak. I think he's energized, and he can speak truth into power in terms of being square and honest with Americans who are facing their latter years. You know, one thing I've learned at 64 years of age and 3 bouts of cancer is I kind of like everything ordered in a nice little square pile too. And when people start messing with changing my routine or changing, it changes me, and I get nervous. But I think Paul has a message that both seniors can appreciate, but also the youth. You know, I mean, he's a young guy. He's 42, and it's really his generation that's going to suffer the most as a consequence what we failed to do. So I'm excited about it. I think he's energized the country and the campaign. And I think if he actually gets heard, most people are going to believe what he says, regardless of their political persuasion.
Final question. David?
Senator, from your vantage point, being the sixth fellow senator, I'd like to hear your views vis-a-vis our parochial interest in Tinker as it relates to the automatic cuts that might happen in sequestration. What are the odds of a deal that avoids some of that? If you even believe it.
Well, first of all, I didn't vote for sequestration. That's a politician's chicken way out. Because it says I don't have the courage to make specific recommendations for what we should cut. So therefore, I'm going to cut good programs and bad programs alike. You can go to my website. It's called Back in Black. I specifically lay out what I think we ought to get rid of. I don't think we're going to have an across-the-board sequestration. I think cooler heads will prevail. My hope is, because it is really crazy to eliminate programs that really work and are constitutional, but not eliminate programs that don't work, that waste money, like a lot of the job training programs, and aren't truly constitutional. So my hope is that we'll see that. But, you know, in my discussions across the aisle, there's not a lot of grown-ups on either side that want to do anything until after the election. It's all about partisan advantage, and even with the president. Nothing happens until that. I think there'll be some attempts in September to maybe come to some type of budget agreement in terms of a big deal. I'm not sure I would think that would be successful given the political nature of the time. But again, across-the-board cuts are stupid. What they say is we have no real leadership in our country and nobody wants to stand up to say, here, stays and this goes. That's cowardice, and that occurs on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Before we adjourn, I'd like to remind you to take a look at the materials that were in your seat when you arrived. Election year is in full swing with a number of runoff primary elections coming up next week and the general election in November. In your chair, you'll find information on the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber Political Action Committee. The PAC aggressively pursues the election of candidates who take a stand for business issues. By participating in the PAC, you can help us strengthen our voice and ensure that Greater Oklahoma City's positive momentum continues. Again, thank you for coming today, and we are adjourned.